It was nearly 1 a.m., and my wife Emily still hadn't come home. Not that I was worried, exactly. At least, that's what I was telling myself as I sat alone at the kitchen table, the only light in the room coming from the fridge I'd left open after grabbing a beer. The clock kept ticking, and each minute that passed started to feel like an accusation. Where is she? Why hasn't she called? The whole evening had been strange. It started as a simple going out with the girls kind of thing. Normally, she'd come back by 10 or 11, usually with funny stories about one of her friends or some gossip from her office. But tonight, no calls, no texts. Just complete radio silence. My mind tried to make sense of it, running through logical reasons, one after another, but it just didn't add up. Finally, around 1:30 a.m., headlights swept across the living room window. I listened to the sound of her car door closing and the light clicking off as she walked up the driveway. My mind was going 100 miles an hour, trying to figure out what I'd say, how I'd keep my tone casual, normal. But when she finally opened the door, there was nothing normal about the way she looked. Emily stepped inside, and her face was... I don't even know how to describe it. Pale, almost ghostly, but with this expression like she'd just seen something she wasn't ready to share. Her hair was a mess, and her clothes, well, let's just say they didn't look like the ones she left in. I waited, half expecting her to say something, to explain herself, but she just nodded, barely meeting my eyes as she muttered a quick "I'm tired" and headed upstairs. I wanted to let it go. I told myself it was nothing, just a bad night, maybe too much to drink. But I couldn't shake the feeling. Something had changed. And I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep until I figured out exactly what. The next morning, I woke up to find Emily already gone. Normally, she'd at least leave a note if she was heading out early, especially after a late night, but today, nothing. Just an empty side of the bed and her hairbrush knocked over on the dresser, like she'd rushed out. I told myself to ignore it, to let her have her space, but my gut was tying itself in knots. I felt like I'd been dropped into some twisted version of my own life. I went about my morning as normally as I could, doing what I had to do around the house, but this unease gnawed at me. My mind wouldn't settle. Questions kept bubbling up, questions I didn't want to ask. Why didn't she say anything last night? Why'd she leave without a word this morning? And why did it feel like I was the one doing something wrong just for wanting to know? Eventually, I decided I had to get some air, just to clear my head. There's a coffee shop down the road where I sometimes go to escape the noise of home. I grabbed my jacket and headed over, hoping some caffeine and a break from the empty house would set me right. I was halfway there when I saw it. There's a little park just before you reach the coffee shop, one with benches scattered around under old trees. And there, on one of those benches, was Emily. She was sitting with her back to me, hunched forward, her elbows on her knees. She wasn't alone. A man was beside her, leaning in close, his face turned toward her in a way that could only mean one thing. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart pounding so loud I swear I could hear it echo off the concrete. I felt this strange sensation, like my mind split in two. One half of me was standing there, watching, frozen in shock, while the other was yelling at me to move, to turn around, to do anything other than stand there gawking like an idiot. But I didn't move. I just kept watching as she reached out, her hand resting on the man's knee. His hand covered hers, and they sat there, saying nothing, just locked in that quiet, disgusting way that needed no words. It felt like I was witnessing something private, something sacred, but sacred to them, not to me. I wanted to look away, but my eyes were glued to them, to this person I didn't recognize, to this woman I thought I knew. The guy wasn't familiar. He looked a little younger, maybe early 30s, with a kind of casual, polished look. Expensive shoes, sharp haircut, just the type I'd imagine trying to be impressive without knowing how much of a fool he looked to everyone else. He had this easy air about him, as if he didn't have a care in the world. I imagined him strolling into that coffee shop afterward, ordering some ridiculous drink, carrying on like he hadn't just shoved a knife in my back without even knowing I existed. I had no idea how long I stood there, just watching, trapped in some bizarre trance as everything I'd built my life on started cracking right in front of me. The rational part of my mind tried to jump in, telling me maybe I'd misunderstood. But there was nothing to misunderstand. She hadn't noticed me, but if she had, I wondered if she'd even care. Would she feel guilt, or would she just look back at me with that blank face she had last night, tired and indifferent? They sat there for a few more minutes, and I couldn't tear myself away. They looked so damn comfortable, like they'd done this 100 times. He whispered something to her, and she smiled. No, she smirked, like she was in on some private joke. My fists clenched, and I realized how much I wanted to walk up and smash that look off her face, to make them both see what they'd done to me without a second thought. But instead, I took a step back, my stomach churning, and forced myself to leave. I walked in a daze, barely noticing where I was going until I ended up back at home, slamming the door behind me. The silence inside the house pressed down on me. I felt sick, angry, humiliated. All those years, all the trust gone and the time it took to watch her put her hand on some stranger's knee. I tried to pull myself together, but my mind kept racing, running back through every moment from the past few months, searching for signs I'd missed. Was this the first time? Had there been others? The questions clawed at me, and I knew I'd never have peace until I found out the truth. It wasn't long before she came back home. I heard the car pull up, her footsteps on the porch. She opened the door, looking casual as ever, like nothing was wrong. She had that same tired look on her face, her eyes a little glazed over, almost bored. It took every ounce of control I had not to shout, not to grab her by the shoulders and demand answers. But I held back, needing her to give herself away, to slip up so I could finally see it in her eyes. She saw me standing there and raised an eyebrow, acting like nothing was out of the ordinary. "Morning," she said, her voice flat. "Sorry I had to run out early. Had a few errands to take care of." "Errands," I echoed, barely keeping the rage out of my voice. "Anything important?" She shrugged, setting her purse down, and I watched her closely, looking for any sign, any hint of guilt. "Just a few things," she said vaguely, not meeting my eyes. "I didn't think you'd mind." Something inside me snapped. Didn't think I'd mind? "Emily, I sat up half the night wondering if you were even coming home. And now you're running out first thing in the morning without a word? Just errands?" She finally looked at me, her face cool and composed. "You're overreacting," she said, like she was talking to a child. "I told you I was going out with friends, and I lost track of time. It happens. Don't make a big deal out of nothing." I laughed, a dry, bitter sound I hardly recognized. "Nothing? Really? You go missing all night, don't bother to tell me where you are, and it's nothing?" Her expression shifted, a flash of irritation crossing her face. "Matt, seriously, you're being ridiculous. I don't know why you're so worked up over this. I needed a break. That's all." She turned to walk away, dismissing me with a wave of her hand, as if she could just brush me off. But I wasn't done. "Who was he?" I demanded, my voice louder than I intended. She froze, her back still turned to me. I saw her shoulders tense, just slightly, barely noticeable, but I saw it. She turned around slowly, her eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "The guy," I said, the words spilling out, each one like a weight off my chest. "I saw you. At the park. With him." For a split second, I saw something flicker in her eyes, panic, maybe. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a look of icy composure. She crossed her arms, her mouth set in a hard line. "You were following me?" "I didn't need to," I snapped. "You were right there. I walked to the coffee shop, and there you were. With him." She sighed, rolling her eyes like I'd just told her something petty, something beneath her. "Matt, you don't understand. He's just a friend." "Friends don't hold hands in parks," I shot back, my voice rising. "Friends don't sneak around like this, Emily. What the hell is going on?" She stared at me, unblinking, her face unreadable. Then, in a voice so calm it made my skin crawl, she said, "You're making a mountain out of a molehill." I needed to talk to someone, to get some advice. "I didn't tell you because I knew you'd react exactly like this." "You think I'm stupid?" I said, my voice shaking. "Do you really think I'd believe that?" She exhaled sharply, a hint of frustration breaking through her calm mask. "Fine. Yes, I talked to him. I didn't want to tell you because it was private. My business. Private? Your business? My hands clenched, and I fought to keep my voice steady. You don't get to have secrets from me. Not like this. Not when it's another man. She didn't answer, her silence like a wall between us, an admission as damning as anything she could have said. In that moment, I knew. She'd crossed a line, and we both knew it. And just like that, whatever was left of the life I thought we'd built together crumbled right before my eyes. I wasn't letting her walk away. Not after all the questions, the nights spent thinking everything was normal, all the times I trusted her without a second thought. This wasn't some misunderstanding, and we both knew it. I wasn't dropping it. She turned and tried to walk past me, but I blocked her path, looking right into her eyes. Where are you going? I demanded. To shower, she said flatly, but I wasn't buying the act. Her voice was too calm, too controlled, and her eyes flicked past me, searching for a way out. Sit down, I said, my voice harder than I'd ever heard it. She glared at me, her mouth a tight line, but she didn't move. We stared at each other, the silence thick with everything she wasn't saying. I took a step closer, trying to keep the rage out of my voice. I'm not asking anymore, Emily. I saw you with him, I saw the way you looked at him. Stop pretending like there's nothing going on. She exhaled, and for the first time, a crack appeared in her composure. Her hands shook as she crossed her arms, looking away. Matt, I don't owe you an explanation for everything I do. Like hell you don't, I said, my voice sharp. You're my wife. You think you can hide whatever this is and I'll just stand by and let it happen? No way. I want the truth, and I want it now. She rolled her eyes, but the calm mask was slipping. You're making this into something it isn't. I needed to talk to someone, and he was there. That's it. Just a talk, huh? I shot back, folding my arms. You think I believe that? I know what I saw, Emily. You were holding his hand. That's not just talking. She hesitated, her face paling slightly, but she didn't say a word. I could see her mind working, looking for a way to deflect, to make me the bad guy here. And when she finally spoke, I knew she'd settled on her angle. You're acting paranoid, she said, her tone hardening. Do you even hear yourself? Accusing me of something just because I talked to someone? That's all it was? I shot back. Because if it was just a conversation, you wouldn't be acting like this, Emily. You're lying to me, and you know it. She took a deep breath, her face tightening. Fine. You want the truth, she said, her voice low. Yes, I was talking to him. But it wasn't some affair or whatever you're imagining. I needed someone to talk to. About what? I asked, not letting her off the hook. About us, she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. About this marriage. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I held my ground. What about it? You couldn't talk to me, your own husband? You had to go to some stranger? Her eyes narrowed. Because every time I try to talk to you, Matt, you shut me down. You dismiss my feelings like they're nothing, like I don't even matter. So yes, I went to someone else. Bullshit, I spat. I've always listened to you, Emily. You're just looking for excuses to cover up the fact that you betrayed me. She bristled, her face flushing. This isn't betrayal, Matt. God, you're so dramatic. I talked to someone because I needed to. That's not cheating, that's not betrayal. It sure as hell is when you're sneaking around with him, I said, my voice sharp. And I don't buy for a second that you were just talking. You've been acting off for months, coming home late, always on your phone. You think I haven't noticed? This isn't the first time, is it? She went silent, her face hardening. I could see she was weighing her options, deciding how much she could admit without losing control of the narrative. And that silence, that pause, it was the answer I'd been dreading. I knew it, I whispered, the realization crashing over me like a wave. You've been cheating on me, haven't you? Emily's eyes flashed, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it again. But then, with a sigh, she dropped her gaze, her shoulders slumping just slightly. It wasn't like that, she muttered, barely audible. Like what, then? I demanded. Explain it to me. What was it, if not cheating? She looked up, her eyes cold, almost angry. It was just. I needed something different, okay? Something new. Something new? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. You're throwing away everything we've built for something new? Do you even hear yourself? Her face twisted, anger flashing across her eyes. You think this is all my fault? Like you're some perfect husband who never made me feel worthless? Don't you dare try to make this about me, I snapped. I gave everything to this marriage. I worked, I provided, I supported you through every damn thing, and this is how you repay me? By sneaking around like some teenager? You don't understand, she hissed, her voice trembling. You don't get it. You've never made me feel alive. I feel like I'm drowning in this life, Matt. And yeah, maybe I did something wrong. But I didn't plan it, okay? It just happened. It just happened, I repeated, my tone cold. That's the excuse? You don't just happen to end up with some guy's hand in yours at a park. How long has this been going on, Emily? She looked away, her jaw tight. A few months, she said finally, her voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it. My chest tightened, and I fought to keep my anger in check. So, while I was at work, while I was here, trusting you, you were out with him? Her face twisted, a mixture of anger and shame. Don't act like you're some saint, Matt. You ignored me for years. Do you know how lonely I was? How worthless I felt every time you brushed me off. Brushed you off? I repeated, hardly believing what I was hearing. I was working to provide for us, for our family. Every sacrifice I made was for you, for our kids. And this is how you repay me? She shook her head, looking frustrated, almost exasperated. You don't get it, Matt. You never did. You thought throwing money at me, at this family, would solve everything. But I needed more than that. I needed you. Oh, you needed me? I said, my voice laced with sarcasm. You think I don't need things, too? I needed loyalty. I needed honesty. I needed a wife who wouldn't run off with some other guy the moment things got hard. But I guess that was too much to ask. She looked away, biting her lip, and I could see the frustration boiling beneath her calm facade. You think this is easy for me, she muttered. I didn't want this, Matt. I never planned for any of this. Don't give me that crap, I snapped. You chose this. Every time you lied, every time you snuck out, you made a choice. And now you're going to stand there and act like the victim? She glared at me, her eyes cold and angry. Maybe I am the victim. You don't know what it's like to feel trapped, to feel like every day is the same damn thing, with no way out. And maybe I made a mistake, but I had to do something to feel alive. That's what this was about? I demanded. Feeling alive? So what now, Emily? Are you going to leave us, throw away everything for some fling? She shook her head, looking exhausted. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know what I want anymore. That was it. I'd heard enough. All those years, all the trust, all the sacrifices, I was done being her fool. The realization settled in, cold and final. There was no coming back from this. I took a deep breath, gathering the last shreds of my composure. Then let me make it easy for you, I said, my voice steely. You're going to get your things, and you're going to stay somewhere else until you figure out whatever the hell it is you want. Because right now, I don't care. I can't even look at you. Her face twisted, a mixture of anger and sadness, but she didn't argue. She knew, just as well as I did, that there was nothing left to say. She gathered a few things, avoiding my eyes as she moved around the room. I watched her go, numb, my mind racing as I tried to process everything that had happened, everything I just lost. The door clicked shut, and I was left alone in the silence of a house that suddenly felt foreign, empty. This was my life, our life, and in a single morning, she'd torn it all apart. As soon as the door shut behind her, I felt the strangest mix of emotions: anger, pain, betrayal. But under all of it was something new. A simmering, relentless urge to even the score, to make sure she knew exactly what it felt like to have someone take your world and shred it without remorse. Emily had made her choices, and now I was going to make mine. I'd spent years working myself to the bone for her, for us, and she threw it all away like it was worthless. Fine. I would give her a lesson in consequences. I'd been a pushover in our marriage, always willing to forgive, to move on. But now? Now, she was going to see a side of me she didn't know existed. The first thing I did was call up my lawyer, David. We went back a long way, so he picked up immediately. No small talk this time, I was in no mood for it. David, I need your best divorce lawyer. Fast. He didn't ask any questions, just gave me the contact for a guy he swore would be ruthless enough to handle what I was about to throw at him. His name's Glenn Winters. He'll get you through this, Matt. And he's not cheap, but he's worth every penny. Good. I want this done right, I said, the decision settling over me like iron. I wasn't walking away with nothing. If she wanted to toss away what we'd built, then she'd have to pay. We didn't have millions, but there was enough between the house, savings, and investments for a comfortable life. No way was she taking all that and walking off into the sunset. I hung up with David and dialed Glenn's office right away. He answered himself, his voice sharp, professional. We set up a meeting for the next morning, and he gave me a list of documents to bring with me. Bank statements, retirement accounts, joint property holdings. I spent the rest of the evening digging through every file and folder we had in the house. By midnight, I had everything organized into a stack. It felt good, productive, like I was finally getting control of something that had spun wildly out of it. But that wasn't enough. I wanted to hit her where it hurt. She'd lied, she'd betrayed me, and I was done playing nice. For the next few days, I played it calm. I told the kids that their mom was staying somewhere else for a while and that we'd see her again soon. Thankfully, they didn't ask too many questions. It was all a blur, getting them to school, keeping myself busy at work, pretending life was normal while everything behind the scenes was being set up. Emily tried calling me a few times, but I let it ring. I wasn't interested in whatever excuse or apology she might have come up with. She'd had her chance to explain herself, and she blew it. But that silence? That's when I knew she was starting to panic. Emily thrived on control, on making sure everything was in its place. And now, I was giving her nothing. A week after she'd left, I had everything ready. I'd stayed in touch with Glenn, and we'd gone over the game plan multiple times. He assured me it was all airtight. No matter what she tried, she wouldn't be able to twist things around to come out ahead. The meeting was set for the following week, and I'd made it clear I didn't want her at the house until we were done. On the morning of the meeting, I walked in, briefcase in hand, my mind focused. Glenn was already there, reviewing the paperwork one last time, his demeanor cool, calculating. He'd built his career on cases like this, and he took obvious pride in his work. Emily arrived shortly after, and I watched her walk in, her expression a mix of confusion and anger. She was used to having things her way, to getting a reaction from me. But not today. I wasn't giving her a damn thing. Matt, she started, but Glenn cut her off, his tone clipped and professional. Mrs. Thompson, this isn't a social call. We're here to discuss the terms of your separation from Mr. Thompson. Please have a seat. I could see the flicker of irritation in her eyes as she sat down. For the first time in years, I was seeing the real her, stripped of all the niceties and pretense. Just a cold, calculating woman who wanted to come out of this with whatever she could grab. Glenn walked her lawyer, a meek-looking guy with a timid handshake, through the terms. He explained how the assets would be divided, how the house would remain in my name, and how her share of the savings was to be limited due to her actions. He laid it all out calmly, confidently, and I could see her shock as each piece fell into place. This isn't fair," she spluttered, her mask finally cracking. "I have a right to more than this." "You forfeited that right when you broke your vows, Mrs. Thompson," Glenn said coldly. "If you'd like, we can go through the evidence we've gathered on your activities. But I think that would be embarrassing for both you and your associate, wouldn't it?" I sat there, silent, as she stared at him, her face pale, mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. She'd walked into that room thinking she still held the cards, that I'd cave or be willing to give her more just to keep the peace. But not this time. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded. "Fine. I'll sign." I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me as she scrawled her name on the dotted line, each signature a step closer to her losing everything she'd taken for granted. I'd worked hard, been loyal, and given her a life of comfort and stability. She had no right to any of it anymore, and now she knew it. When the meeting was done, I stood up, not even bothering to look back as I left the room. Glenn followed me out, giving a small nod of approval. "That went well. We're in good shape, Matt. I'll file the papers first thing tomorrow." "Thanks, Glenn," I replied, feeling the weight of months, maybe years, lift from my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I felt free, like I'd taken back control of my own life. But that wasn't enough. I wasn't finished yet. Over the next few days, I went through every photo, every memory she'd ever left behind in our house. I gathered up her things, her favorite trinkets, and stuffed them in boxes. I made sure to include the framed picture of us on our honeymoon, the one where she'd looked so happy, so content. I packed them all away and stacked the boxes by the door, each one a reminder of what she'd thrown away. Then, I made one final move. I'd saved every email, every message she'd ever sent me, every promise she'd made that now felt like a mockery. I printed them all, creating a record of every moment she'd wasted. And then I sent them to her parents, her friends, anyone who'd ever believed in us. They needed to know who she really was, what she'd done, how little our life had meant to her. The aftermath was immediate. Her parents called me, her friends sent messages, people I hadn't heard from in years reaching out with shock, with sympathy, some just curious, wanting the details. I didn't give them much, just enough to let them know the truth. I'd spent years building a life with Emily, believing in her, trusting her. Now, she could deal with the consequences of shattering that trust. I spent the next week living life without her. It felt strange, like I was moving through someone else's home, a house stripped of all the little pieces of a life we'd built together. But I got used to it, adjusting to the quiet, to the way the air felt cleaner, lighter without her presence. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed. It was a message from her. "Matt, can we please talk?" I stared at the screen, the anger bubbling up again, but I forced myself to stay calm. I agreed to meet her, knowing I needed to close this chapter once and for all. I agreed to meet her at a small cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place we used to go to when we were dating, back before all the years piled up between us. She had picked the spot, and I had a feeling it was some kind of play on her part, a cheap attempt to stir up the nostalgia, to remind me of better times. But I wasn't here for a stroll down memory lane, I was here to end it. I walked in, spotting her immediately. She was sitting by the window, staring out with this distant, sad look on her face. Part of me wanted to feel something, to feel sympathy or even a little pity. But looking at her now, all I felt was exhaustion. She saw me approach and managed a small, tentative smile. I didn't return it. I just pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice soft, almost careful. "Let's just get this over with," I replied, not bothering to pretend. I was done with pretenses, with any kind of act. I'd played the understanding husband, the good guy, for too long. I was here to finally walk away from the wreckage of what she'd destroyed. She nodded, folding her hands on the table in front of her. I noticed her eyes were rimmed red, like she'd been crying, and for a moment, she looked like the same woman I'd once known, vulnerable, like she wanted to reach out to me. But I wasn't falling for it. "Matt," she began, her voice shaking slightly. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't want to hurt you. I let out a dry laugh, unable to hold it back. You didn't want to hurt me? You didn't want any of this to happen? So what was it, Emily? An accident? Some mistake you tripped into by chance? She flinched, looking away, but I wasn't letting her off that easy. She had to own this, face the mess she'd made. I don't know, Matt. It got out of control. I felt trapped, like I was losing myself in this life, in us. And then, when he showed up, it just felt different. I felt like I could breathe again, like I could be someone else. Her voice was barely above a whisper, and I could see the shame in her face, but it meant nothing to me. She'd already told me everything I needed to know. So, what? I asked, keeping my tone as cold as I could. You got bored? Life wasn't some fairy tale, so you decided to go behind my back, to throw away everything we built together because you wanted a little excitement? It wasn't like that, she insisted, her voice sharper now. It wasn't just some fling. I was trying to figure out who I am, what I want out of life. And yes, I made mistakes, but it wasn't just about excitement. It was about freedom. Freedom? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. Freedom from what, Emily? From our marriage? From the family we built together? I gave you everything I had, every damn thing, and you turned it into your own personal prison? She sighed, dropping her gaze to the table, her hands clenched tightly together. You wouldn't understand. You never understood. Then make me understand, I challenged, feeling my anger surge. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like nothing but a bunch of excuses. You had everything. A life most people would kill for, and you threw it all away. She looked up at me, her face a mixture of sadness and frustration. I know, Matt. I know I messed up. I've told myself that every day since this all started. But I was just so unhappy. I felt like I was suffocating. And I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to admit it. Admit what? I demanded, leaning forward. That you didn't love me anymore? That you'd rather be with someone else? Because that's what it looks like. She shook her head, her eyes glistening. No. I did love you. I still do, in some way. But it's not the same. And I don't know when it stopped being enough, but it did. And I can't change that. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, all I could feel was the hollow ache of them, the finality. She was admitting it, finally, in the most pitiful, selfish way possible, but at least it was the truth. She didn't love me, at least not in the way I thought she had. And maybe she never did. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything she'd said settle over me. It was like a switch had been flipped, a moment of clarity washing over me as I realized there was nothing left to salvage. The woman sitting across from me wasn't the one I'd married. She was a stranger, someone I didn't recognize, someone I didn't even want to know anymore. Is that it, then? I asked quietly, my voice steady. Are you done trying to play the victim? Done blaming me for your own mistakes? She didn't respond, just looked down at her hands, her silence answer enough. Good, I said, feeling the finality of it settle deep within me. Because I'm done too. Done trying to understand, done trying to fix this. I gave you everything I had, Emily, and you threw it away. So now, I'm giving you what you want. Freedom. You're free from me, from this marriage, from everything. I stood up, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time since this nightmare had started, I felt like I was finally moving on, leaving her behind where she belonged. I took a step away, then paused, looking back at her one last time. Goodbye, Emily, I said, my voice calm, steady. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. She looked up, her eyes brimming with unshed tears, but I didn't wait for her response. I turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving her behind, knowing that this was the end. There was no going back, no room for regret. I was done. The days after that last conversation felt strange. It was like being in the eye of a storm, the destruction all around, but this eerie calm settling over everything. I didn't have to wonder where she was, or who she was with, or what she was hiding. She wasn't part of my life anymore. It was just me, the kids, and a house that felt like a shell, filled with memories I'd sooner forget. For the first few weeks, I focused on logistics. There was the divorce to finalize, accounts to separate, a house to divide. Each item on the list chipped away at what was left of the life we'd built. I sold some things, packed up others, and by the end of it, the house was stripped of anything that held her mark. I took her photos down, put her things in storage, and boxed up every piece of our past I could bear to look at. It wasn't about anger or bitterness anymore. I just wanted to start fresh, to give myself and the kids a clean slate. The divorce proceedings were mercifully short. Glenn was thorough, and the evidence we'd gathered left little room for her to contest the terms. When the judge ruled, I was awarded the house, full custody of the kids, and a sizable share of our joint savings. She got what she wanted, freedom. And I got the peace of knowing that I'd fought for what was mine and had come out on top. She'd chosen her path, and now she had to walk it alone. One evening, after the dust had settled and the legal battles were behind us, I sat down with the kids. They were young, but they deserved honesty, even if I couldn't give them every detail. "Dad," my daughter asked, looking up from her homework. "Is Mom coming back?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "No, sweetheart. Your mom and I, well, we've decided to live in different places. But you'll still see her, and she loves you very much." "We both do." They were quiet for a moment, processing, and then my son nodded. "Will it be like this from now on?" I nodded, reaching out to place a hand on his shoulder. "Yeah, buddy. It'll be different. But we're going to be okay." They asked a few more questions, the innocent kind that tugged at my heart, but by the end of it, I could see that they understood as much as they needed to. They weren't angry, and they weren't scared. They were strong, and I knew that, together, we'd be able to move forward. Once I'd settled things with the kids, I started putting my energy into myself for the first time in years. I took on projects around the house, fixing things I'd ignored, making changes that reflected my life now. I even turned the spare room into a small home office, setting up a place where I could work without distractions. I stayed busy, filling the empty spaces with activities, with purpose. And slowly, the house stopped feeling like a place haunted by the past. It was my home again. But there were still reminders, little things I'd stumble upon by accident, a receipt from a trip we'd taken, a note she'd left in a book, one of her sweaters buried in the back of the closet. I feel a pang of something when I found them, but I learned to let it pass, to set those things aside without giving them power over me. They were just objects, fragments of a life that no longer existed. They didn't define me anymore. Then, one afternoon, while I was sorting through the last of the things we'd stored in the garage, I found her old journal. I'd seen her write in it before, especially during rough patches, but I'd never thought to read it. But now, with everything behind us, I was curious. I wanted to see if there were answers in those pages, explanations for the choices she'd made. I opened it, flipping through the entries, and read the words of a woman who was both familiar and foreign. She'd written about feeling trapped, about dreams she'd abandoned, about fears that I'd never realized she had. It was strange, like reading the thoughts of a stranger living in my house. There was no mention of the man she'd left me for, no confessions or regrets. Just a sense of loneliness, a feeling of isolation that seemed to build with each page. When I finished, I set the journal aside, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. It didn't make me forgive her, didn't erase what she'd done. But it helped me understand that our story had ended long before I'd realized. She'd been gone for years, emotionally, even if she was physically there. Maybe that was why I'd let her go so easily. She hadn't been my wife for a long time, just someone sharing my space, someone living a life that didn't involve me. After that, I started thinking about what was next. The anger, the hurt, they were fading, replaced by something else. Acceptance, maybe. I'd lost a marriage, but I still had a life to live, dreams that were waiting for me to dust them off. I put everything on hold for her, for our family, but now I had a chance to focus on myself, to build something that was mine alone. One weekend, I packed up the kids and took them on a camping trip, something we'd talked about doing for years but had never found the time for. We spent the days hiking, fishing, laughing around a campfire. I felt lighter, freer than I had in years. Watching them run around, carefree and happy, I realized that I was finally moving forward. We all were. And when we got back home, I didn't feel that emptiness anymore. The house felt like ours, a place filled with laughter, with life. It wasn't perfect, and I knew there'd be hard days, days when the memories crept back, days when I'd wonder what could have been. But I also knew that I was stronger, that we'd be okay. A few weeks later, Emily reached out, asking to see the kids. I agreed, arranging for a day where she could spend time with them at a park near her new apartment. When I dropped them off, she looked different, thinner, a bit worn, like life hadn't been as kind to her as she'd expected. She tried to talk to me, to ask how I was, but I kept it short, polite. I didn't owe her anything beyond civility. Whatever closure she was looking for wasn't mine to give. When I picked up the kids later, they told me about her apartment, how small it was, how different. They didn't say much, just that it didn't feel like home. And I realized that, in their minds, our house was still their anchor, still the place they belonged. I was determined to keep it that way. Months went by, and I started dating again, cautiously, not in a rush but open to the idea of something new. I met a few people, shared a few laughs, and started to see that there was a life beyond what I'd lost. I didn't need to cling to the past, to the mistakes and the hurt. I was free to build something new, something better. Emily still saw the kids, but her presence in our lives was fading, her place as their mother reduced to occasional visits and brief phone calls. She was a part of their lives, but only a small one. And for all her talk of freedom, I could see that she was the one who'd ended up trapped, tied to a life she'd chosen in a moment of selfishness, a life that now looked empty and cold compared to what we'd built. And so, as I looked back on everything that had happened, I realized that I'd come out stronger. I'd faced betrayal, heartbreak, and loss, but I'd survived. I was still standing, still moving forward, and I knew that I'd keep going. That life held more for me than I'd ever imagined. The pain was still there, a dull ache that would probably never go away entirely, but it didn't control me anymore. It was just part of the story, part of what had shaped me into who I was now. One evening, as I watched the kids playing in the yard, laughing and carefree, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I had my life back, a life I was proud of, a life that was mine. And as I stood there, watching them, I knew that I was finally ready to let go of the past, to leave behind the mistakes and regrets, and to embrace whatever came next.